I'm going to tell you about how I met someone who saw Tiernan Oak. The Celtic Otherworld, the land of eternal youth, the blessed realm. If you haven't watched the two videos I made before this, part 1 and part 2, I give all the background information that kind of makes this story make sense. I'll try to get all of this in the last third part. This might stretch into 2 parts, but if you're into Celtic mythology, if you're into adventure, if you'd like to learn about it, I want to tell you the story of when I went to Ireland. Ireland had always been on the list. In fact, Ireland was probably the #1 place I wanted to travel in the world. And I knew I wanted to travel ever since I was a young kid and I read stories about it. And you know, this is after I had spent a couple years living in South America and I had done some of my journeys, but this was the first real one that I felt like, you know, I was organizing myself to track down a legend. It was my favorite place that I wanted to potentially see. My #1 option was to go to Ireland, sail out to the Aran Islands and see Dun Aengus. The reason why this was important was T.J. Westrup reports that he saw High Brazil from this place, and there's actually an old photograph of him, well, of someone else. He takes a photograph of a woman taking a photograph of the ocean. She has a camera pointed out towards the ocean, and this photograph just has enchanted me for years and years, and I wanted to find this place because he was trying to take a picture of the island he had seen as a young boy. And again, if you haven't seen the video on T.J. Westrup, you don't have to watch those 2 videos to hear this story, but it gives a little bit of background information. So anyway, I have a very, very good friend, and a lot of times for my friends when they're about to get married, I go on a trip with them. I take them on a trip. So instead of a bachelor party, we just kind of have a bachelor trip. It's something I've done several times. I've been like blessed to be able to do that a couple times, lucky enough to. And so we decided we were going to go to England and Ireland on this trip. And because mostly if you're getting to Ireland, you usually have to fly through England anyway. So we went to England and we saw a lot of sights. We saw Stonehenge, we saw Glastonbury. Importantly, we saw the Peter Pan statue in Kensington Gardens because that's, you know, our favorite story. You know, his favorite story, also my favorite story. We bonded on that, so we wanted to go see that statue. And then we headed out to Ireland to explore the island, and we got to rent a car and drive all around it. So there's a lot of stories from that trip that were just fabulous, and maybe I'll make videos about them someday. But I want to tell you specifically this story of when we got to the Aran Islands. It was on our list, kind of the climactic part of our trip. The part that we were most excited about was to go out to Inishmore, one of the Aran Islands on the western side of Ireland. And so to do this, you have to go to Galway and then go out to a ferry, and the ferry will take you to Inishmore. And you know, we hadn't done a whole lot of traveling in our lives. I hadn't personally, my friend hadn't either. And you know, we're much more well-traveled. I've traveled with a bunch of my friends and some of my roommates and stuff since then, but this was early on, so I was still figuring out how to travel. And there were things that we didn't like maybe plan for, like the schedule of the ferry and everything. And so I remember we were like on this ferry and we landed, and then we had to rent a bike, and the line was taking a long time, and I couldn't find, you know, the money that we had or whatever. He said, just give me your ID and pay for it when you come back. And I was like, okay, so I gave him my driver's license, and we took the bikes. And you can only get around on bikes on that island. I mean, if people do have cars, but we didn't bring our rental car there. We just parked it and then went about. The island's relatively small, but I remember we got there and it was just this mystical feeling of being in this place where it was so strongly Irish, and the Celtic Irish culture that was there, and everybody spoke Irish, and it was just as likely they were speaking Irish to each other than they were speaking English as well. And sometimes if they had enough of an Irish accent, you couldn't even tell which language they were speaking. But we were trying to research, you know, sightings of Tiernan Oak and T.J. Westrup and all of these things, you know, and asking people about it. So we started asking around in a little village where we were staying, and they told us, oh, all of the old timers are at the bar. You should go to the bar and ask them about it. And we're like, oh, okay, well, which bar? And they just say, the bar. And we're like, oh yeah, we're on a tiny island. There's probably one bar. And we went to the bar, and sure enough, it said the bar. That was the name of it. And we go inside, and we eat the best lamb stew I have ever had. Probably the best stew, for sure the best stew I've ever had in my entire life. It was so thick that it was like on a plate almost, and it was phenomenally, mind-blowingly good. Like I could make an entire video about this lamb stew. It was fantastic. And like, I like food, I love cooking. I'll probably make a video about it. This lamb stew was inconceivable. the way, I have a video where I'm going half crazy because of how good this lamb stew is. And the ambience of this bar was amazing. There were people there, old people, young people, they're all just talking in Irish to each other. You know, I don't speak Irish, but it sounds something like that to the untrained ear. And there are these old timers at the bar, you know, and we went up to them, and everybody's just so good-natured on this island, and they're so welcoming. And we're like, hey, we're kind of wondering, like, do you know anybody that's maybe seen a mirage or something, a Fata Morgana, which is kind of a sea mirage, and I'll maybe make a video on that later. It's something like an island off the coast that is there sometimes, isn't there other times. And they told us, oh, you gotta go talk to Padraig Waters. Padraig Waters was on the radio, he knows all about it. You gotta go talk to him, and he'll tell you exactly all. He's the authority on this sort of thing. He's the one that knows all about Tir na nog. He'll tell you the legends of Tir na nog. He'll tell you everything you need to know about Tir na nog. And we're just like, okay, Padraig Waters, where does he live? Oh, he's on the house at the end of the street, da da da. You know, gave us directions in the way you can only do in a small community. And we're like, thanks so much. And I just remember, you know, there's these three old guys. One of my favorite things is as we're leaving this bar, one of them's like, oh, and by the way, say hello to my old dad there by the door. And we look, and there's just this ancient dude. So the guy was already old at the bar. Ancient dude sitting there drinking his Guinness going, and we're like, that guy's probably 800 years old. He looks 800 years old. Somewhere around here is Tir na nog because that guy's still alive, you know, like the land of youth. Anyway, eternal life. So we're going down this road, we're looking for this building, there's like crazy stuff, like this whale skeleton by somebody's house that we just thought looked cool, and just like really cool things, and we show up to this house. And this is the kind of thing sometimes you do while you're traveling. It's kind of just asking somebody and going to the next adventure, and it's like the coolest thing in the world. It's my favorite freaking thing to do, is stuff like this, because we knock on the door and we're like nervous, what do we do? And this woman opens the door. She's this sweet older woman. And she's just like, oh, hello. And we're like, hey, so sorry to impose. We're not from here, as you can probably tell, because we're just two American dudes speaking with our American accents. And we're just like, we're looking for Padraig Waters. And she's like, oh, yes, that's my husband. Padraig's just a couple houses over. I can give him a ring and he'll come on by. But come on in. And she just accepts us into her home. And I remember she was watching the Cinderella Story, Lizzie McGuire movie. And just the sweetest lady, her name was Carmel. And she just invites us into her house, has us sit on the couch, and we're in this just traditional home that's been there probably for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you know, this architecture is just so beautiful on this island. I just remember she was sitting there asking us about ourselves and the traveling we're doing. The sweetest lady. Yeah, it was just this beautiful moment that we're having as she was telling us about the island and how she loved life on the island and how it was so peaceful having the ocean there, you know, and that her ancestors had been there for probably as long as people had been around on that island. And then the door opens, Padraig comes in, he's this super tall, full of energy, older man. He's like, oh, how's it going? My name's Padraig Waters. You know, he probably didn't say how's it going, but you know, whatever greeting he gave us. You know, he comes in and we're just like, Padraig, we heard that you were on the radio, you're the authority on Tir na nog. And he just goes, what are you talking about? I've never been on the radio. Never once have been on the radio. I don't think they're talking about me. And we're like, well, they told us Padraig Waters, that's your name. He's like, yeah, I'm Padraig Waters. That's my name. And we're like, and you're at the last house on the right side. He's like, oh yes, but I've never been on the radio. I don't know what they're talking about. So we're like, okay, well, can you tell us anything about Tir na nog? And he's like, oh no, I suppose I've heard talk about that sort of thing, but it's some sort of optical illusion. He kept saying that. He says, it's an optical illusion when the light is just right and the mist is there. Some people sort of see something out there. I've heard it, but it's an optical illusion. That's all it is, an illusion. And he would just go on and on about that, but we were fascinated because we're like, okay, people are seeing something out there. People are seeing some sort of thing. Like, this is a phenomenon out here, whatever it is, whether it's an illusion or not, and it's real. People see this thing. This isn't just legends. This isn't just written down in books from 100 years ago. There are people who talk about this, and he's just like, yes, it's an illusion when the mist is right and the sun is just right. He kept saying that. The mist and the sun is just right and hits at the right angle. You can see some sort of illusion of a place far away or something, you know, and so he's just going on and on about, he's like, oh, there's nothing there. There's nothing to the legend. It's just an illusion. It's just an illusion. And as he's saying this, Carmel just goes, oh, I saw Tir na nog once. And in that moment, this feeling of just like reverence and magic filled the room. and I'll tell you about the rest in part 2 of this episode. I'm Levi, and this is Outlandish.